At my new school, the buildings were single-story and Spanish style with dirty stucco walls, arches, and courtyards. The hallways between classrooms were open to the elements covered by portcullis and paved with shiny cement squares. On rainy days, the water poured into the courtyards and over the fenced field at the back of the school. My teacher, Miss Johnson, was young. It was her first year teaching. Her hair fell in a perfect blonde curtain around her face, and her bangs were curled in toward her forehead. When she smiled, cushioned circles formed in her lower cheeks, as if she were holding something delicious in her mouth. I didn't know the Pledge of Allegiance the first time the class stood to recite it. I tried to mouth the words. Only one girl stayed seated. She sat as if she meant to sit, not as if she'd forgotten to stand. "I'm a Jehovah's Witness," she said. After that, I stayed seated too. "Why aren't you standing for the pledge?" Miss Johnson asked. "I'm Buddhist," I said. That was the religion my mother, she said, and my father had practiced. Oh, she said, and didn't ask me about it again. "It's not just parents who decide to have children," my mother said. I was pretty sure this came from Buddhism. "Some say children choose the parents too, before they're born." I tried to take stock of what I'd chosen. My father far away, glinting like a shard of mirror, my mother so close and urgent. If it was true that I chose my parents, I would choose them again, I thought. At school, I wasn't supposed to mention my father. "You could be kidnapped," Ron said. In high school, my mother knew of a girl abducted in a wilderness windowless white van. Her hands and legs tied up. After they'd driven her outside the town, they'd stopped at a gas station, and the girl had managed to open the door and get free. I understood in some vague way that I could be kidnapped because of my father, but because he wasn't part of my life in a daily way, the idea seemed far-fetched and glamorous. At Ron's urging, my mother and I went to the police station, where they took my fingerprints. A man dipped my finger in thick black liquid, pressed it down on paper from one side of the nail bed to the other, hurting me a little each time as he tried to grip my fingers and roll them, leaving a pattern of lines on the paper my mother said were unique to me. Whorls, she said they were called. She showed me how hers resolved in a perfect circle like a topographic map of a hill. "I have a secret," I said to my new friends at school. I whispered it so that they would see I was reluctant to mention it. The key, I felt, was to underplay. "My father is Steve Jobs." "Who's that?" one asked. "He's famous," I said. "He invented the personal computer. He lives in a mansion and drives a Porsche convertible. He buys a new one every time it gets a scratch." The story had a film of unreality to it as I said it, even to my own ears. I hadn't hung out with him that much, only a few skates and visits. I didn't have the clothes or the bike someone with a father like this would have. My last name was different from his. He even named a computer after me. I said to them, "What computer?" A girl named Elizabeth asked. "The Lisa," I said. "A computer called Lisa," she said. "I never heard of it." It was ahead of its time. I used my mother's phrase, although I wasn't sure why it was ahead. He invented the personal computer later, but you can't tell anyone because if someone finds out, I can get kidnapped. I brought it up when I felt I needed to, waiting as long as I could, and then letting it burst forth. I don't remember feeling at a disadvantage with my friends who had fathers, only that there was at my fingertips another magical identity, an extra thing that started to itch and tingle when I felt small, and it was like pressure building inside of me. And then I had to find a way to say it. At some point, I also heard that he'd been named Playboy's Sexiest Man of the Year. I bragged about it selectively because I wasn't sure whether it was true or exactly what it meant. I had gathered that there was a Playboy, also a Playgirl, so I didn't know if he was featured in a magazine of naked women meant for men, or if he was nude himself in a magazine of naked men meant for women. From this, I concluded that my father might be naked in Playboy, and when I thought of it, I got a terrible shiver, and I thought part of growing up would be to take this fact in stride. One of the girls at school, Kristen, started following me around outside class, chanting, "Your dad is Steve Jobs! Your dad is Steve Jobs!" "Stop it," I said. She didn't stop. She said it sometimes tauntingly, sometimes in a monotone like a robot. It was annoying, but the advantage to her harassment was that it advertised the very fact I wanted known. She did the brag work for me, and I seemed innocent, even put upon as she did. "What's wrong with that girl?" my mother said when I told her. "I bet it's her parents. They care. I wonder how she found out." I told her I might have been the one to tell her accidentally. "You told her?" It slipped out. I braced for her anger. But instead, she was only confused. "That makes even less sense," she said. "You told her, and now she goes around telling you. Tell her to stop." What a strange girl. One afternoon, when he came for a skate, my father brought over a stack of 6 stickers from his company next. These were beautiful, thick, large, made of a rigid clear plastic printed with a black cube and brightly colored letters. "You can give these to your friends at school," he said. I was thrilled. When I gave them out, they would know I hadn't made him up. This was the same time I guessed the number of corn kernels in a jar as part of an activity Miss Johnson called guesstimation. It was the second time in a row I'd guessed the number within a few kernels. Even though I'd just written a series of numbers I couldn't have put into words because I didn't understand place order. When my mother came to pick me up, both she and Miss Johnson looked at me curiously, as if I was a secret prodigy. A week later, a poem I wrote was selected for publication in the weekly school newsletter. "The pilgrims are so pretty. The pilgrims are so grand. They sailed here on the Mayflower and walked upon our land." Everything was finally coming together. I was becoming the girl I wanted to be, famous like my father, and lucky. Soon after that, my father brought me over a Macintosh computer. He pulled the box out of the back seat and carried it into my room and put it on the floor. "Let's see," he said. "How do we open it?" As if he didn't know. This made me doubt he was the inventor. The room had only the loft bed on the bright wooden floor. Parallelograms of light shone in from the window, lit dust twirling like sparks in midair. He pulled the computer out of the box by a handle on the top and set it on the floor near the outlet on the wall. "I guess we plug this in." He held the cord loose like it was unfamiliar. He sat on the floor in front of it with his legs crossed. I sat on my knees beside him. He looked for the on switch, found it, and the machine came alive to reveal a picture of itself in the center smiling. He showed me how I could draw with it and save my drawings on the desktop once I finished with them. And then he left. He didn't mention the other one, the Lisa. I worried that he had not really named a computer after me, that it was a mistake. You want to make the kids like you? Tell them you went to NASA and played with the flight simulators. That's what'll make them jealous, Ron said. He worked as an engineer for NASA's Ames Research Center, so he could get us in. On the day we finally went, after he'd talked about it for months, the sun was blazingly hot, and the white rocks outside the tinted glass door radiated heat. He took my picture beside the NASA sign, and then inside at the reception desk, and then again outside the door to the simulators. I'd recently had my hair cut straight across my chin at Supercuts, where we got a discount because my Aunt Linda was a manager. Inside, the simulator wasn't working. Damn, he said. The one day we come, what are the chances? I didn't look like an airplane, but like an office. There were yellow and blue levers embedded in the desks near the keyboards. The screens remained black. The simulators are so incredible. It's just like flying, he said. When he talked about it, I wondered, would it really feel like flying with wind? And if I crashed the flight simulator, would I feel as if I were falling? Look at the screen and pretend you're really concentrating, he said, the camera against his eye, taking picture after picture, and pull down the lever at the same time. That's it. You can tell your friends at school that the screens didn't show up because of the flash. He took me to lunch at a place with white tablecloths and water poured from silver pitchers into wine glasses. He apologized for how disappointing it was that the simulation hadn't worked. I told him it was okay. He took more pictures of me elbowing the table and taking sips of water and smiling until the food arrived and we ate. The night I wrote in my journal that I loved my dad. Then I clarified, not Ron, Steve Jobs. Underneath the name Steve Jobs, I wrote, I love him, I love him, I love him. I felt it. There inside my chest, like my heart would rip apart with it. My mother was admitted into California College of Arts and Crafts in San Francisco, where she would work toward her bachelor's degree. My father offered to take me on Wednesday nights, the only night of the week she had class. I would be alone with him for the first time. We would sleep at his mansion with its glowing white face and 7 acres. It gave me a shiver of excitement and disbelief. Sitting in school that first Wednesday, my new 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Keatsman, sat at the front of the class and twisted a snug gold ring around and around her finger when she was upset with us for being unruly, the flesh tugging near the band. At the end of the day, I ran outside at the bell, the first one, and looked for the white Honda Civic I'd been told to watch for. Barbara, my father's secretary, would pick me up. She was parked against the curb in front of the school. She leaned over and rolled down the window. Lisa? Barbara? That's me, she said, opening the latch of the passenger side door. She drove us to my father's office. Her fingernails on the stick shift were painted red, and she wore a long skirt and a blouse with 2 sections of cloth at the collar that tied in a bow. Her brown hair fell straight in a glossy line that almost, my goodness, that almost hit her shoulders. She wore glasses. She liked being near her. I realized later this was true of the people I knew who worked with my father during the years I was growing up. They were kind and gentle. Often I felt more at home with them than I did with my father. They seemed soulful and modest. I think he must have admired these qualities and chosen them, even though he was not always like that himself. Barbara had a matronly presence, calm and mature, although she couldn't have been much older than my mother. I sat on the carpeted floor in the middle of a huge room with a few low couches, large cement pillars painted white, a plant, and offices around the outside windowed wall of the building. The room smelled like new paint and carpet. Barbara brought me paper and an assortment of pens. From the place where I sat, I could see my father's office across the expanse of floor, the same size as all the offices around him. The door open. I could hear him talking on the phone. People would walk into his office, talk with him for a while, and then stop and say hello to me and ask if I was all set and look at my drawings. I couldn't see him behind his desk because there was a Venetian blind, mostly closed, on the window that faced into the central room. But I could hear him, and sometimes he would walk out of his office waving and smiling at me, and I'd think that maybe we were leaving. But then he'd return to his office again. All the offices had whiteboards. When he was speaking with someone else, he spoke very fast and loud. His office began to glow brightly along with several other offices along the same wall, lighter as it grew dark outside. "I want to show you something," he said at some point, walking up to me. "Leave your backpack." I followed him down the stairs, into another set of closed rooms. We passed a wall with a whiteboard with names and photographs with numbers beside them. At other companies, they try to hide what people are earning, and it's this big secret, he said. "We just write it here and everyone can see it. It stops all the stupid gossip." I followed him down into a basement office with a bunch of desks, a low ceiling, lots of computers, and a few men standing around. Most of the people must have already gone home. He introduced me as his daughter, and then they started talking to each other rapidly, and I could understand what they were talking about. "Look at this," he said to me, pointing at a computer with a large screen. And this, it's like they have a blind midget on the assembly line." He was pointing to Sun Microsystems logos on big monitors, each attached at a different place along the panel at the bottom of the screen. His voice was so sharp that I wondered why they bought them at all. "We need them to make ours," he said. "So computers make computers," I thought. After that, we said goodbye to the men and walked back upstairs. I figured we'd head out now, but he left me near my backpack and went back to his office. Soon he was back on the phone. "Ready to go, champ?" By this time, it was night. Barbara had already left. Before saying goodbye, she held her purse against her lap and squatted down to ask me about my drawings. I was woozy with Fanta from the stocked refrigerator. The thought of going with my father to the big house alone in the dark was unsettling. I hadn't considered the possibility that we'd still be far away from his house, not inside it, when darkness fell. The town of Woodside, a 20-minute drive from Palo Alto, was a place with forests and people who owned horses. His house was a mansion built on several acres of land. This phrase, 7 acres, seemed vast and grand. The more grand than anything I knew. The house was Spanish style, white stucco, with an old metal gate at the front, with a lock strung through that had to be opened by hand, and a flagpole with no flag. The rooms were large and dark and empty, with huge windows on both sides that nevertheless did not let much light in. I knew this from the time I'd been there with him and my mother years before. In the daytime, soon after he'd bought it. This time he'd said to bring along my bathing suit just in case, but remembering that dark pool in the middle of the ragged field from years before terrified me now. Would it be filled with dead bugs and dead animals? Along with the fear was something else, a kind of ecstatic expectation. For on this night, at some moment, I couldn't predict, he'd say, "Let's blast." And we'd walk down that wide staircase through the chemical smell of new textiles and out into the sweet-smelling night air. We'd get into his car, and it would wheeze and rumble the way it did. And for the first time, there would be no one but the two of us heading for his mansion on the 7 acres of land. We drove with the top down, the heat blasting through the front vents. As we set off, I thought, here I am, with my father at the beginning. I am Lisa, and I have a father. And we are driving between the outlines of dark hills inside a strong wind perfumed with dry grasses. I told the story of myself to myself. I didn't know what the story would become, but I knew it would be something, maybe something big. I was too scared to talk. It was almost pitch black inside the car except for the dashboard lights, the trembling needles and round instruments that were nicer than those in other cars I'd seen. The movements were precise, and they gave off a whiter glow. His kind of driving felt heavy and light at the same time. The car solid, fastened to the road, but accelerating quickly with no resistance. He turned on music loud, a hard day's night. Ribbons of cool night air slipped in from the outside and mingled with the heat from the vents. I used the lever on the side of the seat to bring it up and forward as far as possible. My butt and thighs grew hot. The leather had small puncture holes like tiny dots. That must be where the heat came through. We drove over Highway 280 on Sand Hill Road, then into the dark hills where there was only the smell of the grasses and far away the jagged ridge of the redwood trees that met the bright night sky. My father didn't speak or look at me. It was hard to keep thinking of things to talk about. I wanted to be close with him all at once, to feel the way I imagined other children felt with their fathers. I wanted the conflagration of talk, of questions, of noticing. I'd been waiting for so long, and now that we were here, it felt too late. Near his busy silence, I felt a new kind of disillusion. I was starting to disappear. I noticed details about him with exact focus, but had difficulty locating myself. I watched his hands on the steering wheel. He had smart fingers with fine black hair that grew straight on the first joint after the knuckle. His thumbs had wide fingernails like me. He bit his nails and the skin on the sides. His jaw clenched on and off, making a rippling pattern on his skin, like a fish beneath the surface of a pond. I swallowed air, worried that when my voice came out, it would squeak, or about the very real possibility that he would not respond. I was filled with what I might say if he asked me a question, how I didn't do the Pledge of Allegiance at school because I said I was Buddhist, how Mrs. Keatsman twisted her ring, how my mother let me steer on the steep hills of Portola Valley when I was 6, how I'd guessed the number of corn kernels in the jar, how I was practicing to do the leap like the girl in the magazine, how when I was younger to pass time while my mother was waiting in line at the bank or looking at a painting at the art museum, I'd done headstands on the hard ground, painless, hopping up to vertical in one motion. The moment was too fragile for these stories. I didn't want to break it. How was your day? I finally asked, my fingers shaking. In my stomach, and nausea creeping up toward my throat. What would we have for dinner? What would we eat? Okay, thanks, he said. It didn't make him look. He lapsed back into silence and didn't look at me for the rest of the drive. It was not enough. It was not enough. The canopy of gnarled oak branches over the road flared into view and then went dark as we passed. A single car came towards us, moving down the hill. My father toggled a rod beside the steering wheel, and it gave a satisfying click. The headlights dimmed. Once we passed, he did it again, this time restoring the forest to light. I'd never noticed anyone dim lights for an oncoming car, and I felt a burst of affection for him, seized with an idea of his fitness. When I told my mother about it the next day, she said everyone did that. Everyone dimmed the brights for oncoming traffic. We turned onto Mountain Home Road, then onto a road with white pillars on either side, cracked a leaning silvery in the darkness, and then we were approaching it. The face of the house, the flagpole, the gate, and the house glowing white. In the open courtyard, 2 crates the size of small cars held giant trees shaped like bonsai, with clouds of spongy-looking foliage suspended off trunks that grew at an angle. I followed him to the front door, under a high curving arch that made of other rooms and suites that connected to more of the house on the other side. The front door was made of a rough wood that would give me a splinter if I ran my palm along its surface, much larger and heavier than I remembered from when I'd visited before. Inside, he flicked on a switch. The flick sound echoed against the tile floor. In the dim light, I saw a grand staircase with its twisting banister disappearing upward and a motorcycle leaning against the wall in the huge entryway. The body, black leather and bright chrome, double-lobed like a wasp. Is that yours? I asked. It's hinted at a different life. Yeah, he said, but I stopped riding it. Want to take a hot tub later? So that's what the suit was for. When I asked, he showed me to a high-ceiling bathroom I'd never seen before that would, in future years, come to define my idea of luxury. A disconnected cistern mountain far above the toilet, and or a hanging lamp in the shape of a three-dimensional star. Moorish tiles around the sink patterned in thick and colorful geometries. The bronze faucet handles shaped like wings. The room was dim and echoey, the ceiling so high you could hardly see it. I looked around for the flush and found a chain with a white ceramic knob. And when I pulled, the water came rushing down fiercely into the toilet. I followed him into the ballroom and ceiling ribbed with dark beams. And the ceiling ribbed with dark beams. In the center of the room was a glossy black piano with its lid lifted, a lamp, and a black leather couch. The furniture was large but small in this room. In the next room was a fireplace with a high arch beneath which I could walk without stooping. Beyond that, a pantry with empty white shelves that went all the way to the ceiling. Though a swinging door, we stepped into a huge white kitchen. I remembered the progression of vast rooms, the smell of mold and decay, from the time I'd visited before. But that time there had been no motorcycle or piano. My father, reached into the fridge and pulled out 2 wooden bowls containing salads and a bottle of juice murky with brown slit. There was nothing else inside but clean white shelves. He poured us each a glass to the brim, far more than I could drink, then filled a huge plate with the salads, piling them side by side. 1 shredded carrots with currants, the other bulgur wheat with parsley. I am going to give you some of both. All right? I nodded. No one had ever put so much food in front of me. Did he expect me to eat all of it? Now this, he said, holding up a rectangular bottle of green glass, is the best olive oil in the world. I didn't usually like olive oil, but I let him draw a green line on the salads. He handed me an enormous fork. The salads were cold and tasted of nothing, just their own rough textures. We sat side by side on stools at the island, facing the stove. He read a newspaper while he ate. After a while, he asked if I was done, and when I said yes, he took my plate and glass, both still mostly full, and put them in the sink. He didn't say anything about how much I'd eaten. Let's change into our swimsuits, he said. We went through a different door to a hallway and another whole set of empty rooms and a staircase with steps painted white and the paint wearing off in places. We're going to have to make a run for it, he said. There was no way to turn off the light from the top of the stairs. He flicked off the switch, and we were plunged into darkness. The stairs creaked. I hugged the wall, feeling my way up. Boo, my father said, then ghost-like whoosh. Whoa, like that. At the top, I followed him to a door that led to a spindly-covered wooden balcony that overlooked the courtyard with the boxed trees. The balcony trembled with the weight of our steps. "This thing's falling apart," he said. We walked along it to a screen door that creaked when he opened it. "The in-law suite," he said. "What's an in-law?" I asked. "A person you want to put somewhere far away." It was a whole apartment. It smelled like the rest of the house. Old carpet and old mold and wood and paint. I followed him up the steps and down a small hallway into a big empty room, his room. There was a mattress on the floor and a huge television on a metal rack. "And this is your bed," he said, showing me to a room off his. There was a red shag carpet and a futon on the floor made up with sheets tucked into sides and a pillow. The small, somewhat furnished apartment somewhere inside the cavernous, echoing, and empty house gave the feeling of camping. He left me alone to change. When I came out, he was waiting barefoot in shorts and a t-shirt. He handed me a big black towel, much bigger and plusher than any other towels. Everything he owned was big. The trees in their crates, the front door, the fireplace, refrigerator, forks, and television. Near the stairwell, I noticed the same elevator I'd seen before. It looked like a plain doorway, except for the two black buttons beside it. I asked him if we could take it. He said yes, we could. It wouldn't move until the outer door was closed and the latch was closed on the inner accordion door. The diamond-shaped bars traveling with us, a buzzing sound coming from somewhere inside the cage. The wall slipped by as if it were the thing moving and not us. It was like a little prison that held you and released you somewhere else. When it stopped and he reached over to unfasten the metal latch, his arm brushed mine. I pushed open the door and leapt out into the hallway. Past the asphalt, down the hill to the pool, the sharp, stiff curls of dry oak leaves dug into my feet. The wind ruffled the leaves of huge trees around us. The path on the lawn sloped down to the pool and beside it the hot tub. In the moonlight, I could see the hot tub was clean, but the pool was filled with leaves. My father took off his t-shirt and slipped into the hot tub. "Ah," he said, closing his eyes. I got in and said it too. "Ah." I was sitting on the bench across from him. I leaned my head back. Above me, the whole vast sky was covered in stars. They ripped at my heart. I felt the cold wind on my face and listened to the crickets, the creaking of the trees. It was like being in the car with the top down and the heater on. The cold air, the hot water, two separate temperatures at once. We sat down in silence, the bubbles and mist on the surface of the water. I dipped my head underwater. I thought about doing a handstand, but with the current from the jets and the cement benches and the possibility of hitting his legs, I decided not to. "All right, champ," he said. "Ready to get out?" "Okay," I said. My fingers were wrinkled into his hands. We wrapped our towels around us and walked back on the prickly ground. I felt that I was with him and also alone. On the asphalt where the car was parked, he pointed up to the second floor on the corner. We should build a slide from the bedroom to the pool. What do you think? Yes, I think we should, definitely, I said. I wondered if it was just a joke. I hoped it was real. His house was crumbling in places and tended to in others, a configuration of attention and neglect I didn't understand. The toilets had rust-colored rings in the basins. The water dripped into the corner of a distant wing, while outside raspberries were trestled meticulously in the garden. He left the whole place empty, as if he didn't own it but was a visitor or a squatter. When I asked him how many rooms there were, he said he didn't know. He hadn't set foot in most of them. Later, I explored. Rooms and suites and dusty doors swung open to more empty, dusty rooms, more tiled sinks and showers. Toward the back of the property was a huge building that looked to me like a church. It was meant to house a water tower, but inside it was missing the cistern. Had only circles cut out of wood at every story, empty in the center where the tank would have been. These outlines of circles were covered in leaves and bird poop and cobwebs, silvering with age, like the abandoned bones of a huge animal. The whole time he lived there, I didn't think I visited every last room. A kind of magic to have unconquered space, to be past a frontier. I found a tennis court beyond the pool, with vines clogging the surrounding fence. Roots wrapped a cracked through the quartz green surface. In places, the color had faded or worn away. The net was dirty and sagged between the poles all the way to the ground. Is the tennis court yours? I asked him. I don't know, he said. Do you know how to play? I asked. Nope, he said. I don't know either, I said.